Hey, welcome back to the Opel Manta undercarriage and suspension refurbishment project, part 6, 7? We've lost track. Anyways, you might notice this gaping hole here where there's supposed to be like some wheels and some other stuff that makes it go up and down and round and round. Well, we're gonna try to address that today. Or at least a portion of it. One of the first things to come off of the rear suspension was the torque tube. And I think that deserves its own video. It's kind of a unique feature on this car. So we're going to take it apart, clean it up, replace the bearing and the rubber donut, the bushings, and get it all back together and ready to go back in the car in the next episode. But for now, let's begin at the beginning. So this is the torque tube assembly as viewed from below. It's one of the last things I need to take apart. So inside here, you can see the two support bushings that hold the tube to the cross member. And there's a couple of bolts that you can access in these holes here. Once I take those bolts out, I should be able to separate the tube from the cross member, and that'll make it easier to pull these bushings out. So I can salvage those sleeves, clean up the cross member, clean up this tube, and then of course I need to actually pull the shaft out. I guess it's like a secondary drive shaft, and kind of rebuild it. I'll be replacing this rubber donut, as well as there's a bearing inside that I'll be replacing, just because when you're in there, it's a good thing to do. The order of operations that seems to make sense is to take these two bolts out first, and then you can squeeze the torque tube out independently of the shaft. The shaft itself is held in by the donut to the cross member, so that's the next thing to come out. Then I could clamp the cross member in my vise and bash the old bushings out just using a big bolt, for lack of a better idea. Everything's falling down, but it's okay. And there we have it. One cobweb encrusted bushing. So I've had a couple people ask me before, "Hey Andrew, you ever thought about restoring cars professionally? Like as a career? Quit your day job?" It's moments like this when I find myself hacksawing away at old rubber bushings just to save the inner sleeves that I think, no, I would not like to do this full time. If this looks familiar, you may remember a previous episode where I sent in a lot of things to get zinc plated. These are two of them. Okay, so now we're looking at the torque tube drive shaft, and it has this big 27mm nut that holds everything together. And it also has this little crimp collar on it. So I'm gonna have to try to dig in there gently as I can to sort of uncrimp that before I can actually unbolt this. Oh man, that is tight. Goodness. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to uncrimp the nut enough to get it off intact. So what happened was it peeled like an onion. This is not going to be easy to find a replacement for. Once that was off, the shaft was easy to remove. And then I can take out this little washer, don't forget it. In between the yoke and the donut is this spacer, so just don't forget the order these things go in. Everything's pretty intact here, just a little bit crusty. I figured the easiest method to get the bearing shell out would be just to cut the old seal. And this is the bearing shell that we're going to have to split open to get the old bearing out. It's worth mentioning these notches in the rubber donut. The bearing shell has matching notches that fit into here, so keep an eye on that when you're reinstalling. This shell was really tricky to get apart. It's thin and it's a very tight friction fit, so I tried a whole bunch of different ways to get them separated. After a whole bunch of painstaking work with the screwdriver, working it slowly all the way around, I was able to get them separated enough to get them apart. Here's the old bearing with all the nice dried up grease inside there. We'll be refreshing all of that. Once you have one half off, it's a little easier to get the second half. I had to clean these up a bit, clean out the old grease and deburr all those edges I created. Finally, here's the new bearing. This just presses right in. Make sure to line up those notches and just carefully clamp it together with a vise. I also wanted to make sure I had even pressure all the way around, so I spun it around, clamped it, spun it around, clamped it, just to make sure it was fully seated. Finally, you're supposed to fill up this cavity with grease, so I got some fresh Lucas red grease and went to town. I cleaned up the outside because I didn't want to get that grease all over the rubber. I'm always trying to be mindful of using compatible greases with different materials, and rubber doesn't necessarily like grease. Here's the new donut. So for this, I'm going to use a silicone grease because it's compatible with rubber and won't damage it. Just using this to help slip it over. This was a bit tricky. Make sure those notches are lined up, and then there's multiple ways you could try to slip this in. You don't have to do it on the shaft like this, but eventually I was able to get it installed. Well, it took a while and a bit of research, but I think I found a suitable replacement for my pinion nut. This new one is actually meant for a Toyota front differential off of a 4Runner, but it's the same size, same thread pitch, so it should work. New ones do exist for the Opel, but I could only find them in Europe, and it didn't really make sense to ship just a nut all the way from Europe. It'd be kind of expensive. So we'll try this one out. Hopefully it'll work. Now I can put things back on in the same order they came off. First the spacer goes on, and we can put the actual yoke on, all nice and cleaned up. And then there's this washer. And finally our new nut. As a little extra insurance, I might put some thread locker on this. In order to actually torque this to 87 foot-pounds, I've had to reorient it a bit in the vise. Let's see if I can actually get it there. Nope. There it is. Just making sure. Yep. Okay, now that this is torqued, it's time for the point of no return where I stake this into the notch. As you remember, that's how the old one was, and it's an important safety thing to keep that from loosening. So, I probably don't have the proper tool for this, but I'm going to try a blunt punch here. I don't want to use a sharp chisel because that might split it. But basically, I'm just going to try to hammer it into that notch there. To make a long story short, it's not very malleable. Took a lot of hammering, and I wasn't able to get it all the way into this notch, but the goal here is just to get it in there enough that it has a mechanical grip and it's not going to let the nut back out. Oof. I feel like I'm just going to break it. So I think I'm going to stop right there. It's got somewhat of a mechanical bond there. I've got thread locker in there, it's torqued. I think it'll be okay like this. Now let's turn our attention to the actual tube. The first step was to remove these old rubber mounts. So So I still had my 6 gallons of Evaporust that I used in an earlier episode. So I found this great long shallow container that was a perfect fit. I was able to pour all this in, and I put a couple extra containers of water in there to displace it and bring the level up. I did flip over the big piece once to make sure I got everything, but after a couple days all the rust was gone and the paint was nicely softened up. So I took the pieces outside to rinse off any loose paint that would come off before moving on to abrasive methods. I got whatever I could with the big wire wheel before moving on to smaller hand tools. This is the part of the project that just takes a lot of time and isn't that much fun, but the end result is a beautiful restored piece. After I was finally satisfied with the cleanliness, I wiped it down with wax and grease remover and put on 3 coats of VHT roll bar and chassis paint before moving on to the actual tube. This was a bit easier to clean because it's a much simpler shape, so I was able to wire wheel it all off, prep it, and paint it as well. After allowing that to cure for a couple days, I could finally put these new heavy-duty rubber mounts on. For a little insurance, I put some blue thread locker on. Probably not necessary, but there it is anyway. These are actually bigger, so my big crescent wrench wasn't big enough to fit around the outside, so I'm gonna have to use my vise to actually finish tightening these all the way. And just like that, we have one gloriously restored torque tube. Alright, I'm finally ready to put the torque tube assembly back together. Got this shaft reassembled, bearing replaced, new donut. So basically I need to get this into here. There's some little tabs in here that I've already unbent a little bit to help make it a little easier. And just kind of got to wiggle it in there. We'll see. I did go ahead and install the new polyurethane bushings on either side of this cross support. Same as before with the other ones, just grease them up with the special Teflon grease. And this was another case where I reused the original inner sleeves so I can use the original bolts that actually fit the car properly. Anyway, once this shaft is reinstalled in this cross member, then I can slide this in, hopefully. We'll see how it goes. Something worth noting, if you see these 2 grooves here, those fit into these grooves here. So don't go too far. This doesn't go around the outside of this, it tucks inside. So just bear that in mind. Well, I might try now. Let's throw a bit of lubrication on this. And then see if I can't just slide this on over it. Can I? Just slide it in. Just slide it in. Oh, something happened. Yeah, I think I just need to finish it off with a bit of screwdriver action, but that's most of the way in, I think. So this little piece is sticking out here. I should be able to just pop that in, yep. Another piece here I can see. Yeah, gotta make sure to get past those clips. What if we use this bicycle tire tool? I actually just used this last night to change a bike tire. Seems like a good thing for this sort of thing. Just slip it in there in between. Work it around, maybe. I don't know. Hey, I think I got it. Nice. I'm gonna go around the whole thing and do a final check to make sure it's all seated. I just saw that this part of the lip isn't tucked into the clip like it should be. So I'm going to try to get in here and do that. I think that went. But I'm going to go around the whole thing, check all 3 of these locations and make sure everything's tucked in the way it's supposed to be. Yep, this one also needs to get tucked in. Alright, I think I got that. Alright, here's the last piece to this equation, the actual tube. These 2 mounts just slip into place. There's the 2 holes where they bolt in, and they have these notches on the end, so they should slot right into place when they're there. It's going to be a tight fit with these new heavy-duty rubber mounts, but we'll see how it goes. Should be able to just slide this down over. And then line those up, and hopefully they'll kind of pop into place, right? Probably gonna end up scratching the crap out of my nice paint. I hope not. Let's get one side started, at least where it can slide down there. Okay, that one's going. This is just kind of awkward, you know. Something happened. Did that one snap into place? I think it might have. Ah, there it goes. Beautiful. Yeah, I boogered up my paint a bit, but I can touch that up. They're in. All right, looking at the bottom side, if you tilt this a certain way, you can see those holes pretty well. So it turns out this is one of these situations where you need a little magnet on a stick in order to get this little short bolt and washer stack fed in here and started into the hole. You can get 1 or 2 turns on it, make sure it's sort of starting to thread in, and then hopefully I can go in with the socket and get it going. Yep, excellent. I'm gonna snug down both of these and then we're done. By the way, cool little detail here. See how it's stamped 773? Must be the month this piece was made. July 1973. Cool. Then, as promised, I went back and touched up the areas that I had scraped up with a black paint pen. This is a nice, easy way to cover up blemishes like this. There it is, all done. That's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to tune in next time when I refurbish the grungy rear axle and install it back in the car along with the new lowering springs, polyurethane bushings, Coney yellow sport shocks, and all the other refurbished components and get this thing back on the ground again. See you next time.